Hello and welcome back to the channel, where once again it's time for another Sega Saturn review. With us today, taking a look at one of the most expensive and rarest games, certainly here in the PAL region at least anyway, in the form of Street Fighter Collection, a compilation of the games Super Street Fighter 2 The New Challengers, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold. With this compilation originally coming out in Japan in September of 1997, it was followed by a North American release in December, and then finally a PAL release quite late in March of 1998. So the collection is comprised of Super Street Fighter 2, which was the first game to add the 4 additional characters, DJ, T-Hawk, Cammy, and Fei Long. We've also got Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which was the first game which we saw Akuma in, and also super combos. And then we've also got Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, which is an enhanced version of Street Fighter Alpha 2. Like always, I'll be talking about what the compilation looks like, sounds like, plays like, what kind of content and lifespan it has to offer, and ultimately whether it's still worth playing today and has the quality to make our PAL and Worldwide Sega Saturn top 10s. So once you hit the main menu, you'll see that Disc 1 gives you the choice of Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, with Disc 2 having Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold on it by itself. Once you pick Super Street Fighter 2, you'll see you've got a choice of arcade mode, versus mode, options, and backup via save data. When you head into options, you'll see you've got difficulty and time limit choices, as well as shortcut and sound options, along with the BGM test and the choice to alter your control pad layout. Once you load up Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, you'll notice you've got the exact same modes of play, and the options are incredibly similar as well, but there is one noticeable addition, and that is of course the speed option. You can have it set to free, which means you can pick what speed you want it to be before the battles themselves, or you can have it permanently set to turbo speed 0, 1, 2, or 3, and this directly affects the speed of the gameplay. So of course this will boil down to how fast you like your gameplay to be. Other than that, it is the exact same options as Super Street Fighter 2. And last but not least, once you load up Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, you'll see you've got a choice of arcade mode, versus mode, training mode, survival mode, Akuma mode, options, and backup. Once you head into options here, you'll see you've got the exact same choices that were available in the original version of Street Fighter Alpha 2, with one noticeable addition, with that being the S combo choice and whether you want it on or off. So with all of that out of the way, we can finally get onto the visuals of the 3 games within the collection. And I think I'd be fairly accurate in saying that at the time of Street Fighter Collection's release, these were the best looking versions of these games available. I don't think many people would argue that the Saturn versions of Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo were superior in their visuals to the original releases on the other formats, and also that Street Fighter Alpha 2/Alpha 2 Gold was probably the very best looking 2D fighting game on the Saturn that didn't use a RAM expansion card. Alpha 2 Gold in particular holds up incredibly well in my opinion, with the vibrant colours and the fantastic sprite work and backgrounds within the game, and the fact that the game is incredibly smooth in its performance with no noticeable slowdown, and the multi-layered backdrops add in a fantastic sense of depth to all of the environments, which just gives the game a tremendous visual presentation overall, and it holds up so well. Even though it's a 1996 game originally, Street Fighter Alpha 2, it still looks spectacular now, especially when you pull off all of those super moves within the game too. I think it's fair to say that Alpha 2 Gold is the visual highlight of the package. With Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold looking so good, does that mean the other 2 games on the collection look poor in comparison? Well, no. They're of that original Street Fighter 2 visual presentation, and it's still got a massive amount of charm and personality to it. Yes, the colours aren't quite as vibrant in these two games. Yes, the animations aren't quite as impressive for the moves, but there's no denying that these two games still look good because they're 2D games. They hold up so well, and actually both of these games in the collection actually look better than some other fighting games on the Saturn that saw releases. Games like Battle Monsters, games like Rise 2, these games do not look anywhere near as good as any of the games in Street Fighter Collection, and that's a massive testament to the quality of these games, that they've stood the test of time so well, and they still are visually appealing to this day. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the presentation out of the battles as well, because the character selection screens, the versus screens before the fights begin, and the cheesy dialogue screens at the end of the battles all have fantastic visual presentation to them. It doesn't matter which game we're talking about. In the collection, they're all still visually appealing in this regard as well. Yes, because I've got some kind of sentiment towards the Street Fighter games, maybe I am biased. Maybe because Street Fighter Alpha 2 is very high in my Saturn top 10, I'm somewhat biased to that game. It's very hard not to lean in towards what you actually personally prefer when you're looking at games like this. But I genuinely think as a collection, all three of the games hold up very well all these years later. So moving on to the sound effects and music next, and it would be fair to say that all three games in the collection sound absolutely brilliant. It's very hard for me to say anything negative about any of them at all. Now, we know the Street Fighter games have got many memorable tunes, and of course they're here within the collection and they sound incredibly good, but it passes over into the sound effects and the voice samples as well, because they sound as good as they possibly could. It really is a brilliant sounding collection. If you played one of the older games on a cartridge-based system and then came to play them on the Saturn, you will notice a vast improvement in the quality. And of course, it's to be expected, but it can't be denied that they sound fantastic nonetheless. And the great thing is here as well, whilst these games are obviously fairly old, they sound better than a lot of other fighting games that were developed for the Saturn at the time, and that's a testament to the quality of the sound that's within Super Street Fighter and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, that they can sound so much better than many fighting games that actually came out after them. It really does emphasize that they're fantastic sounding games. So of course, like always, I will give you several examples of the music that you can find within the collection. So moving on to the gameplay next, and the basic structure for all three games in the collection is exactly the same. You pick your fighter, you fight through every round, and then you see your character's ending. It's a tried and tested formula. In regards to the controls for the games, they all have the basic 6-button interface of 3 punch attacks and 3 kick attacks, and the only difference is that Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold uses the R and L buttons to replicate pressing all 3 of the punch or kick buttons simultaneously. If you like the more traditional old school Street Fighter 2 style of gameplay, then Super Street Fighter 2 will give you this, as it is the most basic of the 3 games within the collection in regards to the way it plays. Once you progress on to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, we do get more additions to the gameplay, which of course include the debut of the super combos, additional moves for existing characters, variable gameplay speeds, and also the throw softening mechanic, which allows players to land on their feet and reduce the damage that's inflicted upon them. By the time you come onto Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, you've got all of the additional gameplay elements that had been added in the Alpha series thus far, but the Gold edition of the game did add some tweaks and alterations to the gameplay too. The custom combo damage and its effectiveness was slightly weakened in the Gold edition of the game, but to compensate for this, they did increase the damage from normal hits, and this was designed to emphasize the importance of standard attacks as well. Some characters did gain additional moves as well, but for me, probably the biggest change was the S combo choice within the options menu, because when you turn this on, it enables your characters to pull off all of their super combos regardless of the fact that they don't have their bars charged. And what this means is that your character, when you input one of your special move commands, will actually pull off the super combo instead. What this does, for me at least anyway, is add an increased level of intensity and frenetic action to the battles. Of course though, some people will criticize it and say it gets very repetitive, seeing the super moves over and over again. In all fairness, I could go on for a long time about how all 3 of these games play, how they're all still tremendously enjoyable, and how it's still incredibly satisfying to defeat an opponent with one of your super moves, but we would be here forever. If you're a fan of Street Fighter games, and there is without a doubt something here for you, whether you prefer the older style of Street Fighter games or the slightly more modern Alpha style, you will have something to satisfy you in regards to the way the games play. Yes, you may find it difficult to go back and play the original Super Street Fighter 2, as it does feel somewhat slower, as you have no options in regards to the gameplay speed. And in all fairness, this will probably be the game in the collection that you spend the least time with, because it is the least enjoyable of the 3, and there is simply less variation in the gameplay on offer here. But of course, the other 2 games, in particular Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, are still incredibly enjoyable to play, with lots of characters to play as and loads of fantastic looking super combos to pull off. And in all fairness, Street Fighter Collection is a brilliant playing game. So moving on to content and lifespan next, and Super Street Fighter 2 has 16 playable characters, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo has 17, and Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold has 18, although this game does have various alternative versions of characters available to play as too. In terms of modes of play, the first 2 games simply have an arcade mode and a versus mode, and for me, these are the kind of games where I'm going to play through it once with each character, see their ending, and probably not play them anymore. Now, of course, the main bulk of lifespan comes from Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, because Street Fighter Alpha 2 by itself is one of the very best games on the console, certainly that I've taken a look at so far, and it's why it's so high in my Saturn top 10, both PAL and Worldwide. There are more moves to master in this game, more super moves, and of course more modes of play, which just means the lifespan for this game on the whole is absolutely brilliant. It really, really is. We saw on the Saturn lots of arcade ports had very limited modes of play and quite limited lifespan in all fairness, but Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Alpha 2 Gold here are absolutely brilliant in this regard, because there's a decent amount of characters, because there's lots of moves, because there's different modes of play. You will get a good amount of lifespan from this game alone. And of course, when you factor in the fact there's 2 more Street Fighter games as well, the lifespan and the content on offer here is very generous. So like always, that leaves me with my two final questions. Is Street Fighter Collection still worth playing now, and does it have the quality to make our PAL or Worldwide Saturn top 10s? Now, if you've never played Street Fighter Collection and you're a fan of playing games on your Saturn still, then yes, because you'll get a lot of enjoyment out of this, especially if you're a fan of 2D fighting games, and even more so if you are a Street Fighter fan, because it is a fantastic collection of 3 games. Of course, you can just play all of these Street Fighter games on much more modern consoles now, so many people will say there's not much point in revisiting any of these older Street Fighter games on the older systems, but of course that's a choice that you would make yourselves. In terms of does it have the quality to make our PAL or Worldwide Saturn top 10s, well, what you have to do is take into account that Street Fighter Alpha 2 is currently ranked number 3 in our PAL top 10, and it is ranked number 6 in our Worldwide top 10. And Street Fighter Collection includes Street Fighter Alpha 2 and 2 more games. So in reality, it is better than Street Fighter Alpha 2. In fact, Street Fighter Collection scored an amazing 95% in Sega Saturn magazine over here in the UK when it came out. So the big question I've got is, does Street Fighter Collection simply replace Street Fighter Alpha 2 in my top 10s, or does it enter the list as well? And I've been umming and ahhing this as I think about it, and I'm making the video because it's a tough choice to make. And what I've decided to do is to treat the top 10s as having any game that was physically released eligible to enter, regardless of whether it included previously released versions of games or of course was compilations of other games as well. Which means Street Fighter Collection comes in our PAL top 10 at number 3, and everything else drops down a position, which means Darius Gaiden has now finally dropped out of the PAL top 10. It has been in there a very long time. In terms of the worldwide top 10, it's a little bit different because some of the other games in the list, I actually feel Street Fighter Collection is better than Shining Force 3 Part 3, and I actually think on the whole it's probably better than Dragon Force 2 as well. So Street Fighter Collection is coming in at the number 4 slot in our worldwide top 10, which means Sega Rally has fallen out of the worldwide top 10. Of course, these points are very debatable. I'm sure there'll be lots of people who disagree with me with the fact that I've left Street Fighter Alpha 2 in there, but I'm treating these top 10s as just released titles on the system and their overall quality. They are by no means my favorite 10 games on the system. I want people to realize that. I'll probably make a top 10 favorite games list at some point when I've pretty much finished all of the main games that I want to review on the system. But of course, what I want to know is everybody else's opinions on Street Fighter Collection. Did you get it? Have you played it? Of course, it's a very expensive game now in the PAL region, so it's one of these games that not many people are going to actually be able to afford to add to their physical collection now. Like always, let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll be back in the near future with another Saturn review. Goodbye for now.